Every surgeon has had the experience of walking into an OR and knowing before a single instrument is picked up that something is off. The focus isn't there, the weight of the last case or the next conversation, or something you can't quite name is just sitting there in your chest. Nobody in surgical training ever taught us what to do with that. My name is Dr. Cara King, and this episode is a conversation I wish I'd had 15 years ago. I'm joined by Dr. Jane Lee and Dr. Jason Brooks, a mental performance coach who has spent decades helping elite performers across surgery, professional sports, and law enforcement understand what's actually happening in their minds under pressure and what to do about it. We cover a lot of ground today: arousal regulation, identity, moral injury, the feel it, fuck it, fix it framework. Yes, that is a real thing. And yes, it works. These conversations are frank. There are moments in this conversation that genuinely moved me and changed the way I process and think about the operating room. This is Mastery in Motion. Welcome.
Who have you worked with, Jason? Let's start there.
It's funny that the list of who I haven't would probably be shorter. I mean, you name it: CEOs, business types, elite athletes, performance artists, SWAT teams, military operators. Obviously, I've worked in medicine for, I think it's coming up now on 18 years. But I work with all of those groups all of the time. So, and I think it gives me such an advantage because you learn anecdotes and you learn different perspectives from different arenas that you can bring in to each other's arena. It's funny, I had an opportunity one time. I was working with an emergency medicine group and also continuous work with some of our local SWAT teams, and just sharing stories with each. The TAC folks loved the medical stories. The medical folks really. So I thought, well, wait a second. Why don't we merge these two worlds? So I had the TAC team come and observe a high stakes sim in Emerge, and then I had some of the emergency medicine folks come and observe some of the high performance tactical training that they do. So it was just such a powerful way to bring these two groups together.
Like, I am obsessed with that mindset. Like, I'm even bored just within GYN. I don't mean bored, but so narrow-minded, right? And I think that's one aspect of coaching that we've had a huge lens, right? Of at least multiple subspecialties. But even that seems narrow, right? Like, we should be tapping out of medicine truly for best practices and for true integration. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, and it's interesting because in my experiences in medicine, especially in early days, I had to learn that it's not enough to talk about medicine. You have to be very niche and specific to whatever the particular branch of medicine you're talking to. I mean, maybe the surgical folks don't resonate with the emergency medicine ideas or the internal medicine or whatever. So, I think like anything, being good as a coach or facilitator, you know your stuff, but you have to then learn, the key psychological effects and nuances in any performance environment. And once you know that, I think the ideas and the strategies and the examples resonate much deeper. And you can tell when you've gained a little bit of that if you will. It's funny, I used to say in early days, you talk in front of a group of physicians, there was, at sometimes some pushback and blowback, which is fine and acceptable, obviously. Now I don't get any of that. And I wonder, why is that the case? And I think it's because, I know their world, your world now. And so I just think there's maybe a vibe you give off that suggests that, I'm no longer poking my head in. I've been in here for quite some time. I've invested, I've learned the particular challenges that exist in your performance world, both at a clinical, technical, and human level. And I think it just allows me to get better buy-in right out of the gates.
Jason, if you were to sort of reflect on, what you were talking about, those two different groups that are quite different, but there's obviously similarities.
Yeah.
When you reflect on that, what could the merge docs learn from the SWAT team and vice versa? What were the learnings from mixing those high performance groups?
I think the biggest thing in that particular example was it wasn't necessarily that they learned new things, but it reinforced the way that they were doing things to their learners. The way that they were teaching people to communicate under intense situations, the way that they were teaching people to support one another, the preparation that they were doing in advance to make sure that at an individual and at a team level, we're not over aroused to the point that we can't focus and execute effectively. So it was neat. It was almost like just instantly they were speaking the exact same language, and you could just tell that the mental explosions were, we must be doing it well. Like if that's what they're doing here under these conditions, and we're doing this over here in these conditions, it must be that we're doing something right. So I think that was the biggest takeaway. There wasn't a whole lot of epiphanies,
Mm-hmm.
but I think there was a ton of reinforcement that, again,
Interesting.
and what are some of the ties that bind? Human beings in high stakes performance moments and learning to both communicate and perform under that intensity.
Interesting. And you mentioned in there like a whole bunch of things that are interesting, but the arousal piece is
Yeah.
something that I think when I reflect on where we are as surgeons in um, doing something that is a technical performance and not dissimilar than other walks of life, I think that that arousal piece for me is something that is very foreign for people to consider or think about before they're about to walk into a certain environment.
Yeah.
I really do feel that there's something that's missing, that understanding of that. Have you found that in your travels over the last couple decades?
Yeah, I think, and not in every set of circumstances, but if you just say, what are the biggest barriers, let's say in the surgical arena, to someone, executing to their potential? I don't think it's necessarily the circumstances. I mean, you're well trained. I mean, if you're more junior, obviously there might be a little bit of doubt as to what you're doing. But if you're someone who's senior and experienced, the real biggest barrier is what we're thinking and how we're feeling. And so both that can happen within the moment, things are going great, and all of a sudden a complication comes up, and now we're not just operating from a technical framework unless we're using AI robots, and we're not.
Mm-hmm.
This is a living, thinking, feeling human being who is susceptible to a surge in arousal, in the form of a strong feeling or emotion that comes up. And in that state, like they say in neuroscience, that activation can block access to your information so that I'm somewhat impaired in a split second. So I think it's important to have strategies at the human level to be able to regulate in real time, just to quickly, if the tachometer that is you is in the red line, at 10,000 RPMs, and I don't have the ability, I always like to joke, it's not like in the middle of a surgery, you know what? I'm stressed out. I'm going to go for a walk around the block. I'm going to call a friend. I'll be back in 20 minutes. It's like, you don't have 20 minutes. At least I don't think you do. So what can I do in real time to take that tachometer that is me from 10,000? I don't got to be in a Zen state, but I got to be in a slightly less activated state such that I can, perceive things accurately. I'm not, missing information. I can still communicate effectively. So learning that, but equally, I think that the work of that, is oftentimes done in advance, wherein if we recognize as a human performer there are circumstances I've either been in or could be in that if I was, could cause a momentary surge in terms of my internal arousal, which by definition could, provide some distraction. So, as best as I can, I need to have some strategies in advance to make sure that, I have the ability to de energize strong feelings that can come up. And if I don't work at the level of the feelings, it's tricky because my belief is it's the feelings and emotions that then project onto the
Mm-hmm.
thoughts. So you might be doing fine. All of a sudden, something tricky happens, a complication arises, and it's bad enough, you kind of get that surge of panic or fear or uncertainty. But those emotions and those feelings are signals. Now it's distracting me at a cognitive. Oh my God, I'm not ready for this. This is too much for me. This happened before and I didn't perform well. So now it's like a double layer of distraction, which makes it then hard to focus on the technical task, which is why, to your original question, this is not just a technical performance, that's for sure.
I want to bounce off that, and I'm sorry. I got kicked
Yeah,
off
no
for a
worries.
second. I'm picking up a little bit, and I think I have enough. I want to bounce off that. So I'm hearing you say, right? You have something happen in a case, a complication, or something that throws us off bandwidth-wise. We are trained so much to exemplify confidence, right? To compartmentalize all of our emotions, to not show any of those emotions, right? So a lot of that's going on internally, but maybe externally, nobody is seeing that. And I have people outside of medicine often talk to me about how well I can compose myself and how well I do compartmentalize. I think that helps me in the OR, but it definitely does not help me in my life sometimes.
Yeah.
So I've heard. So my question for you is, when you speak with surgeons, how do you help them maybe name emotions, process emotions? Because things that serve us in the OR don't always serve us outside the OR. And I'm even going to the space of vulnerability that you need to have with coaching. You almost have to switch that. So how do you approach surgeons with that dichotomy?
And I think there's sort of two ways to look at it. I mean, and sort of we hinted a little bit at that when I was talking to Jane. You know, there's the acute moments here and now in the surgery where something has come up out of nowhere. And, you know, I've got to find a very quick and effective way to bring that arousal that's causing some internal distraction down. So, you know, to your point, a couple of deep breaths, you know, giving off the energy that I am in control, that I'm calm, because otherwise you could have this negative contagion. However, in teams that are well trained and there's a high degree of support and collegiality and togetherness, I think it can be powerful as well if you're the surgeon to acknowledge, whew, you know, that was a little heavy. That's all I have to say. I don't have to break down. I don't need a hug. It's just, but I can acknowledge what the feeling in the room is. And I think sometimes there's power in the person who is the surgeon in saying that, because you're as much saying it to yourself. You're giving yourself permission in the moment to acknowledge what I'm actually experiencing. And in saying that, you'd be surprised how quickly it can bring down some of that arousal. It's almost like you're saying it to yourself, giving yourself that, just that opportunity to acknowledge and process a little bit of that. And then very quickly with that drop in arousal, my focus comes back much more readily. Now, your question was about, you know, what can I do, you know, to sort of more effectively bring that down? And again, I think that to me, this is about knowing oneself and practicing, you know, whether it's in your personal life or, you know, you can anticipate if you were in a surgical situation that would cause you to spike in some way. I don't need to be in that to have a sense right here, right now, as to whether or not that could potentially throw me off. So because I'm aware of that, I can either consider a moment I haven't been in, or I have a database of experiences, or woof, you know, when that happened, you know, the old engine was revving pretty high. So I can use either of those two things to practice the art of letting go. And by letting go, I don't mean, you know, immunizing myself from ever having human feelings in, you know, let's say in the case of a surgery, a little bit of doubt, a little bit of fear of uncertainty, a little bit of panic or what have you. Like, you're human, you're going to. But when those feelings come up, to me, it's more about how do I meet myself in that moment to allow some of that energy to go down, such that I'm, you know, much more present and situationally aware. And so there's a couple of strategies. Like, I believe that a lot of the work that we're talking about, the reps get done before you enter the OR. And so just getting into the practice of, you know, when strong things come up, you know, having a little bit of an algorithm that you can do to bring that down. And I can share a quick one that I like to do. And so if it's purely about bringing down the emotional energy, the feeling level, you can do one of two things. And you could put your hand on your chest, because there's power in that, just making some kinesthetic contact. And I want you to take a couple of deep centered breaths, like through your abdomen, really stretch that out, nice and deep, nice and slow, nice and rhythmical. And as you're breathing in that way, I want you to do one of two things. You can either envision that the energy that you're experiencing, you know, a shot of doubt, a shot of fear, a shot of worry, whatever it is that you're experiencing in that moment, I want you to envision as though there's like a ball of energy that remains neutral until it gets activated. And in that moment, when a strong negative feeling comes up, whew, that sucker's glowing and pulsing and all the rest of that. So I just use it as a visual to put your attention there. And we'll get to the method behind that madness. So now I'm taking a deep breath. I'm imagining that there's this activation sort of central in my chest. And as I'm doing that and exhaling, I want to identify, and this goes back to what you said, Cara, identify what is the feeling that's moving through me. And every part of that is important. You know, I can imagine that, you know, fear is moving through me. You know, nervousness is moving through me. And you go, okay, why are we doing all this? This just sounds like hokey stuff. Well, first and foremost, the breathing is done because, as I said to you, so much of that surge in arousal, that fear, that panic, that worry, that has a physiological origin. Like that's where emotions come from. So, by virtue of being in that state, we're in a borderline or not a borderline, a full fledged fight or flight. So, by virtue of shifting our breathing rate, you're tricking the mind and nervous system into believing or sensing that the danger, the threat must be dissipating, it must be passing. There's a direct relationship between your breathing rate and your affective or emotional state. So, as my breathing brings down the physiological arousal, so too does it draw down the mental and emotional. So, that's number one. The reason we focus on this imaginary ball of energy, and I'll say the other thing you can do is if you're more kinesthetic, I encourage people to make a fist with one hand, then wrap that fist with the other hand and squeeze. And now instead of, exhaling and seeing this ball of energy dissipate, as you exhale, just release a little bit of tension in your hands. And again, it's producing a bit of a sense of relaxation in your body. The reason we focus either on this ball of energy or, in this case, the pressure on the hand is because by putting my attention there, it's not on the distracting thoughts and feelings that were coursing through me. I get a little bit of psychological distance there. Those thoughts and feelings thrive on your active attention. So by pulling it away to something neutral, it begins to sort of quiet down in the periphery. And then the other thing is the saying, identifying the feeling or the emotion and stating that it's moving through me signals to my mind it's okay. Like there's nothing to fix. There's nothing wrong here. There's a rogue feeling that's come up. Congratulations, you're human. And if I just let it move through unabated, that will get me to that place of renewed focus and calm and ease far quicker than trying to fight it, or certainly we don't want to become it. I like to use the analogy of a rainstorm. If it's a beautiful summer day and a rainstorm comes out of nowhere, what can you do to accelerate the passing of a rainstorm? Nothing. Sit back.
Nothing.
Don't worry about it. I promise you, eventually it moves through, and what's left behind is clear sky and sunshine. It's no different inside of us. So, learning the act of not fighting feelings, not resisting feelings, and not feeling like I have to fix them. They come up, let them move through. Take a few deep breaths and bring them down. And now, if we're talking something more longitudinal, so if someone has, a particular block, let's say, certain procedures get to me or certain circumstances get to me. It's one thing to bring the feelings down in a moment. That's great. But now, can I do something to help mitigate against the effect of that coming up constantly? And so now there's maybe more of an interrogation of the thoughts that stem from being in that feeling state. And I always encourage people to write down, and this is sort of there's a researcher, kind of author coach in California. Her name's Byron Katie. Her work's amazing. And she has sort of this 4-question approach that she likes. And I've modified that to make it 6, but, I like to give credit where credit's due. And so the first thing you do is, let's say you had a particular concern about some procedure. Oh my God, that procedure always ties me up, or, I get really fearful and anxious. And I might be thinking to myself, I suck at this procedure, let's just say. So I will write that down. I suck at this procedure. And now that I've de-energized the feelings, the mind is actually accessible and open to a different way of perhaps looking at my circumstances. Good luck if I'm still heightened in those feelings. It's like, if you have children, if you've been around young kids, if they come to you in full meltdown mode and you're trying to calmly, rationally suggest to them a different way of viewing their circumstances, that ain't going to work. No hope.
No,
Yeah.
0%.
If you bring them close, give them a hug for 30 seconds, and you just feel the feelings de-energize, now whatever the insight we can provide them can actually be received. It's no different inside of us when we're caught up in that heightened activation state. So now that we brought the energy down and we're looking at the thoughts, and I go, okay, the first question I'd ask myself about I suck at this procedure, we're trying to differentiate between, is this an actual truth, or is this a feeling that's trying to convince us that this is the truth of who we are? And oftentimes it's the latter. So let's see. Let's just test that theory. So the first question I'd ask someone is it true that you suck at that procedure? And they'll look at me like, haven't you been listening to me? I do suck. It's terrible. I get nervous. Like, okay, I'm not going to challenge you there. I get it. But I also like to differentiate. I don't know if that's you talking to me in this moment versus your history of fear that's sort of punting you out of the screen and taking over for you. So the next question I would ask is, okay, but is it absolutely true? And here's where the magic happens, because if you're being honest with yourself, you can always find some shred of evidence that suggests it's not absolutely true. I've had moments where it went well. I've had parts of it I can do well. I'm not terrible at it all of the time. And already now we are differentiating between, so it's not a fact of the world, it's the way that I feel. And that feeling has been highly reinforced. Now we're not dealing with something that is true to us. We just need to get better at de energizing the feeling that's driving that. The next two questions I would ask is, when you think about yourself in that way, when you believe that you suck at this procedure, what does it do to you? Like, let's get an actual sense of how this is not only torturing me in terms of how I feel, but creating a false narrative that's contributing to low confidence, heightened stress. My stomach's in knots the day before, even thinking about doing this procedure or whatever it is. And you start to realize, wow, that's a lot of damage I'm doing to myself, not because I'm anchoring to the truth of who I am, but I'm believing a BS story about myself that I highly reinforce. The next question would be the opposite. So if you did not believe that story so fully, what would open up for you? Oh my God, I could sleep the night before. My hands wouldn't be shaking. I could articulate more effectively. Would be far less stressed in the rest of my day. I wouldn't snap at my significant others because they don't understand the stress and pressure I'm on. It's like, wow, not a small positive change if I just didn't consistently see myself in a light that's not even true in the first place. And then the way I like to work is I believe, and there's been lots of books written about this, but I believe that we have sort of an internal critic, if you will. The voice that speaks
Mm-hmm.
to us and tells us, you're not this enough, you're not that enough, it's too hard, I suck at this procedure. And it's not who we are, but man, that voice is so convincing at times. And so I like to envision that voice as a part of me, not me, but a part of me. You can call it the inner critic. There's a beautiful book called The War of Art, where the author describes that voice as the voice of resistance. And I always like a joke. You can call it Larry for all I care. I don't care, but just know that there's a voice that talks to you that thinks it knows the truth of who you are, but it's not. It's coming from fear. And when we're coming from fear, all we see is threat. So, again, going back to sort of that young child analogy, it's like if you could give that young child something that it needs in that moment to allow it to relax a bit, what would that be? Probably some compassion, probably some reassurance. So, can I talk to that part of me that's afraid, that part of me that gets caught up in these anxious thoughts and concerns, and ask what it needs? Number one, it just needs your attention. It just needs to know that you hear it. It senses danger. It's trying to alert you to that. And once I do, it calms down ever so slightly. And then can I give it any additional information that it's not focusing on when it's caught up in fear? Like, look, I have done this procedure before. I have a great team around me. I can call Jane if I need an assist. And these are objective truths. And so, next thing you know, in that moment, I have now brought that energy down, and a more present, effective, truthful sense of who I am is able to emerge in the next moment. And then the final sort of wraparound question, if you will, is you take that original concern, okay, I suck at this procedure, and you write down the exact opposite. You know what? I don't suck at this, or I'm fine at this procedure, or it sometimes goes well. I don't care how you frame it. And now you ask yourself, which of those two ideas is actually true? Not which feels that way when I'm caught up in some strong negative emotion, which is actually true. And so now you have a mechanism across two important realms. The original feelings that come up, learning to de energize those, because again, if we can't bring those down, you're not going to think or talk yourself to a better place. When that energy comes down, now the mind is receptive to work on the thoughts or their perspective. And we just do a little bit of interrogating of the inner critic, and we learn very quickly, wow, I'm torturing myself based on information that's not true.
Yeah, that's a really interesting scaffolding. And I feel like we torture ourselves with false information like all day, every day. So I think you're hitting a spot in surgeons that we feel really deeply. And I'm also thinking about this space of performance orientation and mastery
Yeah.
orientation, and a culture needed to really promote mastery, meaning that space of vulnerability and enjoying, like, exploring the journey of things, and the space of true growth versus performance orientation, where we have a shell that we have to represent to people
Yeah.
around us that doesn't allow for
Sure.
growth, right? And then I'm going to this space where you were asking, where you ask your clients or coachees about, is this actually true, right? And I'm curious, how much are you utilizing the space of data? Meaning, there's a lot of surgical intelligence now and data metrics that we
Yeah.
can obtain about our surgical metrics. And I think once you start breaking those down, oftentimes we do have this light of saying, you're right, I don't suck at this as much as I thought. I have some really fantastic outcomes. So I'm curious of your experience working with surgeons. Are they starting to anchor some of these emotions on data metrics, and how has that changed the way that you interact
I
with
think
surgeons?
it's a great question. I think though the utilization of the data metrics, it only registers if I have committed deep within myself to believing that I'm someone who in fact, is okay at this or doesn't suck at this. You could give all of the objective data in the world, but if I'm committed to thinking and feeling not good enough in some way, it won't matter. So I think both of those, once you learn to bring the energy of the feelings down, once you learn to adjust and adapt your perception of yourself as someone, even just getting to neutral, then the idea of actually receiving those data that go, look, there's nothing to see here. Like, you're fine. Your complication rates are well within the norms, or, whatever the things are we're looking for, then I can actually receive it. But I mean, that's the whole idea of imposter syndrome, right? It's not just sort of an
Yeah.
inability to acknowledge our true capabilities. It's more insidious than that. It is a conscious commitment to think and feel not good enough. You giving me evidence to the contrary, that voice in my head will fight that. Well, those data don't matter. What about this thing? What about that thing? So if I've not found a way to reconcile that part of me that just will not allow myself to be at peace with the fact that maybe I am okay in this field, the data oftentimes falls on deaf ears.
Our big line all the
Yeah,
time, Jason, is data alone does not equal performance
doesn't.
improvement. You nailed it, right? There needs to be a conversation around it on both
Yeah.
sides, right? On
Well,
both
and it,
sides.
it
So I think
actually then can
what I'm
be
hearing is really
almost
important.
gaslighting to that person, because now it's like, you should
Yes.
feel different than you do, but I don't. And so now I feel even more helpless
Yes.
and more ostracized because, I can't even bring myself to allow myself to be neutral with the actual, truth of my performance capability and outcomes. It's
And
like, work with a lot of residents, and listen, all senior staff that are well intentioned and supportive, but there's certain things no resident gearing up for their exam wants to hear. They don't want to hear, "Oh, you'll be fine," because you don't know that. They don't. And they don't want to hear, "Oh, these things are not as tough as you think." Neither one of those things helps, because they're feeling the exact opposite of that. So now it's not only unhelpful, but it's making them feel even more self-conscious. They're telling me I'm going to be good and just fine, but I don't feel that at all. What's wrong with me? So it's the same thing. The information might be accurate, but if I'm committed to not seeing myself in that light, it can actually be hurtful and damaging.
so you bring up that whole side of things where I feel like in medicine, the more we can be committed to being vulnerable and actually saying what it is
Yeah.
that we feel. I think that whole, you said earlier, that activation blocks access to information. You've
Yeah.
said that. And I sort of feel like in medicine, we're taught to be almost like a duck. You're like cool, calm, and
Yeah.
collected, but underneath, you're paddling like crazy. And I think during that, you're also suffering because you can't say it.
Yeah.
And you said earlier that, well, maybe you don't have to be that duck. Like you said, in the OR, it's okay to say, oh, wow, that was heavy. Or,
Yeah.
oh,
That
that was
scared the shit out of me.
challenging. Or alerting the OR, like sort of saying, it's okay to say, this just happened. And it's okay to say, wow, that was a lot. And letting the OR team know, hey, like
Yeah.
in this moment, I need help.
Yes.
And that just might mean that people stop talking about what they did last Sunday. It might mean
Right.
that people are coming to see what they can do to assist, or it might just mean that you feel now that you have that resource around you to help you. But I think that that's also the imposter syndrome is if we don't talk about our feelings and we continue to suppress what's actually going on for us because we get these comments like you'll be fine or it's really not that bad. Well, I'm feeling that. If we don't have a space where we as surgeons or physicians can say, well, yeah, you're saying that, but it feels really bad. If we don't
Yeah.
have that vulnerability, I do think that, you know, the whole pressure to self-regulate to the point that we are a duck can be harmful to us internally
Yeah.
and who we are and what we take home with us.
Well, and I also think too that in a moment like you just described, in just being a little bit vulnerable and acknowledging something I might be experiencing. And again, there's probably a fine line. Like I'm not going to break down in front of my team like you are the leader in that moment, but just a little bit of acknowledgement helps me release. One of the greatest surgical performers and human performers I've ever been around, and Jane has heard me talk about him, was a guy by the name of Dr. Kurt Tribble. He's a cardiothoracic surgeon in the US. And he talks about when he's doing really intensive cardiac procedures, he talks about how vital it is for him to process his emotions on every stitch. If he's carrying a pang of guilt or fear or worry from this stitch to that stitch, he makes himself susceptible to what they call in his space the widow stitch, which means I'm going to be talking to someone in the lobby and telling them that unfortunately their loved one didn't make it. And so he has learned in the context of those microcosms of seconds to just be processing in real time, whether that's something he's doing internally or whether it's something he's verbalizing to others. If it allows a little bit of the pressure valve to release, it makes me more present and better able to do the thing I'm doing. When I get asked to give talks to groups, they'll often ask me, what's the most important team trait? And I always hate the what's the one thing, but okay, I'll play along and I'll say, I'll give you my answer, but you're gonna never invite me back, because
Those are the
yeah.
best answers. I can't
Well, I
wait.
know,
What
and
do you
I'll even
got?
sometimes preface this. I know what you're looking for me to say: teamwork, communication, collegiality, togetherness. Those are all vital team traits, no question about that. But every single one of those things is downstream of trust. And what's downstream of trust is vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
How can I earn your trust if I'm not willing or able to show some degree of vulnerability? And so again, what might that look like in the OR? Asking for some assistance, acknowledging that, whew, that was a little bit hairy there. Maybe acknowledging I missed something. Like, not, again, breaking down and getting emotional or any of that stuff. But in doing so, not only does it allow a little bit of release from me, it's me acknowledging what I'm experiencing. Once I put it out there, it dissipates ever so slightly. But as you said, Jane, it gives the team an opportunity
Mm-hmm.
to support me, to give me something I might need, a bit of
Mm-hmm.
encouragement, some technical assistance, a kick in the ass if that's what I need. Like, let's be honest. I mean, whatever it might be. So again, it's a fine line, and I think people probably bristle when talking about you should be more vulnerable in the OR. I get it if you're thinking about it in some complete breakdown type of way, but a little bit of a reflective statement. Whew, that was a little harder than I thought. You're mirroring what every single person in there is probably feeling, and you're probably kidding yourself sometimes that they're not picking up on that. I'll tell you, one of the more powerful experiences, I was working with a surgical group one time, group of residents, and there was one of the residents, the senior, part of the senior class, and this guy came from a military background, and he kind of had that strong, stoic persona. And we had all of the residents from all of the years 1 through 5 in the same room. We're having these conversations, talking about being vulnerable with difficult outcomes and all the rest. And one of the junior residents said, well, we can't all be like so and so, referring to this one stoic person. And I'll never forget because that person just happened to be seated right beside me. And it was like a big boardroom style room. And he was the strong silent type. So when he spoke, people listened. And he just very, like, almost for effect, he kind of slowly poked his head down the table, made direct eye contact with that particular resident, and said to him, he said, yeah, he says, when I'm here, I'm doing my damnedest to make sure that when situations are stressful or hectic or dire, as Jane said, I'm trying to give off that calm composure. He said, but let me shadow your misperception. He says, because you don't see me that night in the fetal position crying myself to sleep. It's like, wow. And I honestly believe, I get goosebumps telling that story. Not only did that particular person shatter the glass ceiling of what we can now share with one another about how we're feeling about, at times this really stressful, challenging performance arena, I think it goes deeper than that. I honestly think that down the road, that might have been something that saved a career, if not more. Like, you mean we can actually talk about this and we don't have to be the strong silent type, and we can acknowledge in a moment where we're feeling something a little bit intense that I'm feeling something a little bit intense? Yeah, you can. And ask yourself, when you do, does it make you feel that you've experienced a bit of a release? Because if you have, that is conducive to better technical performance in the next second. And if you know that it does and you're not doing it, I might challenge you and go, are you as committed to being a high performer as you say you are?
That's a really powerful story. And I think you're hitting on a theme that it's more than just individuals doing the thing, it's the culture of allowing this to be felt on a much larger scale. And so my mind goes through this space of, and this has been one of the most powerful parts about the Academy for Surgical Coaching, in one of my opinions, is meeting with all these different surgeons from all over the world, from all these different subspecialties, right? And serving as a coach for so many different people, and understanding that this theme is universal. And even the strongest, most powerful surgeons feel this way. They just don't talk about it oftentimes out in the open. And so I'm curious, what have you seen when you've gone to different institutions and different places about the culture needed, and the culture shift that maybe you've seen happen, or the culture shift that you've supported and walked through this process from the bottom up, top down? What are you seeing in regards to that aspect?
Well, I think medicine often gets the rap of things move at a glacial pace. I think that's fair, and I think that it's much easier, especially we're talking about a fundamental shift in perspective on what good training looks like. We're now allowing in some of the softer skills to support the human being behind the scrubs and the scalpel. That's probably a cliche, but and I'm very mindful when I go into a new environment like that to get a feel, where is the senior leadership at? Are we just talking about this in terms of buzzwords, or are we actually committed to trying to change the culture? And if I'm being honest, it's changing, but I think there's still a little bit of the old way of looking at things at the highest levels. It's like, oh, that all sounds good, but it can't come at the cost of our technical training. So in situations like that, I really focus on the group that's going to change the culture going forward, which is the more junior staff, the residents, the fellows, etc. And I also think I'll go even more micro than that, which is, I firmly believe that you change the culture as a measure of N equals 1. So the people in there who are willing and wanting to embody a different way of being, trust me, if you have someone who's in your performance environment who is comfortable enough in their own skin that they are totally okay acknowledging a little bit of vulnerability in a way that allows them to release and perform more effectively, I promise you, people will gravitate towards that. Now, it might be a bit of dipping of the toe because, wait a sec, this veers off from the never let them see you sweat way we're supposed to be, but it's much more aligned with the actual human experience. In all my years of doing this, people are craving to be in an environment where it allows and supports more of this, but there's some vulnerability there. There's some risk historically in being the one to decide, no, I'm going to be like this way. I don't care how I'm perceived from other people who think differently. I'm going to be this way. But when you see and feel the difference, those individuals, in my perspective, they have more peace. And that is an attractive quality. And if there's peace in performance, you're going to do well. And I think it also becomes very protective against, burnout effects that otherwise can come over. I gave a full day workshop one time. So there's a group in Canada. Jane, you would know that the acronym, I always forget. Is it the CPSA? So or CMPA. This
CMPA.
is the group CMPA. So if you've got into some difficulty, you got a college complaint or maybe a medical error, this is the first number you call. And many of the caseworkers there are former physicians themselves. And I was giving this talk to the group, and we were talking about this exact same thing, being vulnerable, being able to be okay with mistakes and setbacks. And this gentleman in the back of the room stood up, and he looked like he was in his 60s. And he was a former surgeon. I'm not exactly sure which part, doesn't matter, he shouldn't identify it anyways. And he says, I want to tell you my story. He said, when I first got into medicine, he said, I was so determined to be someone who'd be perfect. And he said, I was that guy. I came early, I stayed late, I was in on every single case, I did every single research paper. And he says, and you know what? It worked. I became known as that guy all throughout my career. And he said, what I was completely unaware of was the train wreck that was happening everywhere else in my life as I was trying to, sustain this impossible, sustainable standard. He first mentioned that, his relationship with his wife, fizzled out. He was completely disconnected and even to this day had a strained relationship with his kids. He missed every single thing that they had. And all the while that was happening, eventually his physical health started to suffer, and then his mental health. And here was this, probably 60-year-old male surgeon in a group of his peers with tears streaming down his face, essentially saying, don't be like me. And he said, I wished I would have learned earlier in my career to be okay with, not being perfect and seeking out some assistance. So I guess that's an extreme manifestation in the negative, but some of that mentality still exists. And I'm a big believer that that's something that is ripe for change in a positive direction.
That story I feel is so common too. Like I see that a lot. And then I think about our newest trainees coming, medical students and residents, even new faculty. And I feel like a lot of them have actually gone the exact opposite direction,
Yeah, sure.
at least in the States. What I'm seeing is a lot of people saying, I'm going to be part-time. I'm only going to be working 30 hours a week. Or if they are full-time, putting very strict boundaries on the time that they will spend. And if I'm documenting for my charts, that counts as me working. That's part of my allotted time each week. And I'm not going to take extra call. And I feel like the boundaries, at least here in the States that I'm seeing, have swung way far the other way. And that's also generating some chatter. And so I could not agree more that you have to have priorities outside of work that you need to maintain. Jay knows I ride my horse. I have a horse that I'm not very good at riding, but I do it. I love him. And running, and I have kids, and I think that's really important. But I'm curious, are you seeing any of that in newer people coming out of medicine, where they're having very strict boundaries, and what's that interaction
certainly
look like?
seeing it and hearing it. Like again, there's a little bit probably of a culture divide there. The old rear guard, if you will, and sort of the newer progressive way of looking at things. And I don't disagree. There's probably a healthy balance in the middle that needs to be struck. It's not necessarily a 9-to-5 job that you've signed up for here. Having said that, I don't believe that it should be the thing that makes me die on the hill every single day. And I'll say it not just from a quality of life perspective. You certainly want to respect that and honor that and help people facilitate more of that, but also from a performance perspective. I don't want the surgeon who hasn't slept in 3 days and is stressed to the max and is dreading their life circumstances and worrying about their family situation because they haven't been like that. That's not conducive to a healthy, well-adjusted life as an individual, and certainly some of that can flow into the actual performance. So I think a balance is best. Now, having said that, a lot of the system challenges and inefficiencies, shall we say, do bring their share of problems. There's no question in terms of being able to maintain some semblance of balance. I know that's a word that people don't like to discuss, but it is what it is. I think people, want to experience some of that. So I think it has to be a very personal conception of what that is and means, that also honors the fact that there are certain embedded and inherent responsibilities that come with this field that are perhaps different than other vocations that one could do. So again, not to the extreme, like, okay, sacrifice your whole life for this thing, but also extreme the other way, perhaps isn't the best option as well. And so I think helping people understand coming into it, it is going to be challenging. There will be moments where it's tough to maintain a semblance of balance at all times, but what can it look like if we optimize that? And how do we sustain ourselves as we move through? I'm sure, Kara, you'd love to be able to ride your horse 7 days a week. I also,
It would
yeah.
help me a lot,
And my
not
guess
suck.
would be that
Yeah.
you are not
Mhm.
able to ride your horse 7 days a week.
No,
So, whatever the opportunities you
no.
do get to experience that, you got to make sure that you are looking forward to that and squeezing every drop out of that. And there's different ways to achieve that sense of balance and prioritization. And I talked to an emergency medicine doctor who's just a guy I love. His name's Salim Rezais in the US as well. And his philosophy on balance, if you will, he says, I think what we're really talking about is just prioritization. And I'll often ask,
Yeah.
busy professionals like you all, okay, like what are the most important priorities that you want to see yourself give some time and energy to? And I don't care what they are, but give me a list of 10. And so they'll talk about, their physical health, their mental health, their finances, their personal relationships, their hobbies and interests, and yes, their research and their vocation. And I'll say, okay, just in terms of right here, right now, as a snapshot, rank yourself like 1 to 10, one being abysmal, 10 being optimal. How do you feel you're at right now in terms of honoring what you're saying are the key priorities in your life? And if I look at that chart and step back and go, wow, I'm a 2 out of 10 in terms of my physical health, that tells me where we want to might put some attention and effort, or if I'm a 2 out of 10 in my personal relationships, okay, maybe that's where we need to make sure that we're carving out a little bit more time in that direction, whatever you would define as a little bit more time. And if we can just do the best that we can, given the at times hectic and demanding realities of the field you're in, to try and optimize the most important things, to me, that is balance.
Yeah. And it's amazing how much, I mean, we talk about performance psychology in the OR, but that's like such a small sliver. Like everything outside of it impacts what's going on
Absolutely.
inside. And that's what you're surfacing,
Yeah.
Jason, a lot of. And even this balance aspect, I know that some people like that word, some people don't. Other people prefer integrate, right? Because my balance may not look like
Yeah.
someone else's balance. And I think, however you look at it, being creative and having autonomy over your practice to integrate in the ways that make sense in regard to
Yeah.
your priorities, I think that's really important. And as leaders, the other thing I'm hearing you say a lot is model the behavior that you
Yeah.
want to see. So don't be that guy doing all the things if you're saying it's okay for your team. Like you need to model the behavior that you want your entire team to encompass for that N of one type
Yeah.
of culture shift of being psychologically healthy in and outside of
Absolutely.
the OR.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The person I mentioned earlier, Dr. Kurt Tribble, you're not going to find someone in his field who has as many publications, who has as many teaching awards,
Yeah.
who has done as many, complex, impressive surgeries, but that also makes sure that he is there for his family. He has his love was basketball, and I should say, talking the past tense, tragically passed away last year. Um, but his love was basketball. And in a busy, hectic, demanding field that he was in, one thing was sacred, and it was Saturday morning basketball. And it did not matter where he was or what was going on. If he was coming straight from the OR, after he was going to basketball, and just having that thing that was just for him, that was protected, did more, I think, for his overall sense of balance or integration. Or we're talking about the same thing, but I appreciate people. Yeah,
Same
just, and
thing.
it's a personalized conception that allowed him to stay, in a space of alignment with, loving what he does and feeling that he's still taking care of and expressing and experiencing parts of himself outside of this role. And that's to me what it comes down to. There's different ways of doing it. There's no one size fits all, but to me, it has to include having moments to step away fully from this particular role that can become all consuming. We have to be able to have time to engage in activities or relationships that are restorative in some way, shape, or form. And hopefully, we have the opportunity to experience and express parts of ourselves that we love such as horseback riding. I see musical instruments in Jane's background. I had no idea that she does that, but maybe
Yes.
it's not you, but or physical activities, whatever it is.
I do not play a musical instrument, but I'm in my partner's room.
There you go. I was wondering.
Well, you look
Yeah,
like you
you
do, and
should
it's
have. You
pretty
should have met.
sweet, Jane. So good location.
But speaking of music there, and
Yeah.
you've dealt with a lot of different people, Jason, like CEOs, athletes, we're talking about the psychology of the high performing surgeon. And we talked a little bit about intra-op, how to manage that arousal state. And we talked a little bit about the importance of balance so that we're healthy humans. What do you think high performing surgeons are doing before the OR that maybe is being missed by others that makes them then able to perform in a way that's different? What do you think is missing pre-op? What do they do?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. I think partly it's knowing thyself, as the saying would go. If you're someone that gets nervous or anxious heading into something, I'm not going to want to just hope that somehow tomorrow is the day that's not going to happen. So I'll take a bit of time in the morning just to do a run through of my day. If there's certain procedures or things that I'm concerned about or could get challenging in some way, I'm doing a bit of a run through anticipating what are some of those things, how might I respond, where will I find help if I need it. Just doing stuff to calm the nervous system down a little bit. And then I am a big believer, like kind of stealing more from the athlete model. I'll always ask physicians if they have any sort of like a pre-shift routine that they engage in. And it doesn't have to be something that's all that complex. It's like, yeah, I come a half hour early, grab a coffee, sit by myself and just kind of get myself settled. That's great. Having something that allows you, it's like I use the analogy too. If you were someone that went to the gym, you're not going to hopefully go to the gym, drop your bag down, go straight to the bench press bar, put the most weight you can lift on, and start repping out. You'll rip a pack. What do you do? Or if you're a runner, you warm up. Why? Because I'm getting my body and my mind ready for the load I'm about to put it under. So for me, it's the same thing in surgery. Why wouldn't we do that? Could you spend 5 minutes in your office before you actually go down to the UR just to do a quick internal scan? Okay, is there anything I'm bringing into this that if I'm not careful could bleed its way in? Maybe a poor choice of words. Some tension, some frustration in my personal life. I'm stressed about my taxes. I don't know what it is. And if so, can I just spend 5 minutes to, again, do some of the exercises we talked about, bring some of that emotional energy down, perhaps offload something on my mind, making a few mental notes. I'm thinking about this. I want to rectify this when I get back. I got to make sure to, phone this person or whatever, and just do a bit of an offload such that I can show up in that moment in the best state to come in there and just be and perform as I can. So it's like I said to you, it doesn't have to be some half hour complicated routine, but it's just about making sure that I'm aware enough heading into that I've done what I can to get me to a neutral balanced state such that I can be fully focused and present to perform. I even think too, like we talk a lot about administrative pressures. So I'm a big believer, okay, if you have a whatever, a contentious call you have to do at 2 o'clock. And then I'm going from that to a resident meeting, and then I'm going from that to the OR. I like to build in a 2 minute window between each of those things to process, to come down, and then to gear up for the thing that comes next. Such that, again, I'm practicing throughout the day this sort of a attentional and energetic transitioning that allows me to release from this thing and be ready as I can be for the next thing. It's funny you mentioned earlier, Cara, about we're talking a lot about performance and being ready in the OR.
Yeah.
And I a lot of times I'll work with surgeons who will say to me, "Look, OR is my sanctuary. I need help with all the other shit. The emails and the
Yep.
stresses and not having enough time in my personal life for things I want to do and what have you." So I think learning to manage your energy effectively there and prioritize there is just as important.
I love you so much. I feel
That's a
like
good
you
sign.
are. I want to put you in my pocket and just carry you around. So I feel like you're putting words to so many things that we just haven't been able to
Yeah.
put words to, but we'll just feel like something in our chest that doesn't feel good, but we can't name it. And you're making me
reflect on my days and things, the way that I interact with people or things that I need. Like, for example, between cases for me, I have to
Yeah.
be alone. I have to usually go outside and not talk with anyone and just be alone. But in between cases, it's usually the time when a lot of people want to meet. Let's have a meeting. Can we talk about this research thing? I have a lot of industry partners. Can we go over this device? Or there's people try to load those in between. Can you add on this virtual visit in between cases? And when I do that, I feel myself so like on edge, and I haven't really been able to name why. I'm just like unhappy with the world during those moments. And then I have to rush back to the OR, and I maybe didn't eat then, and then I'm not mentally ready for the case that's about to start. And so I'd say not even like I've been in practice for like 15 years. I'd say just maybe only 5 years ago, I've realized that I just need to be by myself, and I'm being unproductive during that time. I'm being inefficient with my time, which isn't something that I typically am, but I know I just need that. And what I'm hearing you say is sometimes you don't even know what you need unless you talk with someone that can be your mirror, that can help you understand these emotions you're feeling that maybe you can't put a finger on.
And I think allowing yourself that the 5 minutes that you might need after a big surgery before the next thing is not whatever, you not managing yourself. It is absolutely conducive and part of achieving and sustaining a high level of excellence in all the things that you do. If you were an athlete and just ran a race, we wouldn't take you straight from running. Okay, I know you're still breathing heavy, but we got to go train now. It's like, you wouldn't do that. You'd recover, you'd relax, and you'd slowly transition to whatever the thing was that we were going to do next. And again, I think a lot of times people hear this idea and go, oh, there's just no time. Really? There's not 2 minutes? You probably don't need 20 minutes. I mean, ideally, if you could do that, great. But I promise you, 2 minutes alone in your office with the door closed, where you could just get some personal space and come down from whatever the thing was you just did. Maybe there's some feelings you need to process and release. Maybe there's some thoughts that are going through your mind. You're beating yourself up. And if you just give yourself that space to debrief and come down, you'll be so much better going to the next thing. And not only better, but there's an economics of energy there. You'll have more energy for the next thing at the end of the day, and etc. All this can be yours for 2 to 5 minutes of ruthless protection of your time. And listen, unless there's an absolute emergency, I personally believe that the industry people or the administrative people can wait 5 minutes. They can wait 5 minutes. And especially if the trade-off is they get all of you. They don't get a half you, they get all of you. It's no different now managing the personal side of life. I'm a big believer in optimizing the commute home. Like if there's some way to process the day, release from things. And then the final thing I always suggest to people, before you physically enter into your home or wherever you live, and particularly if there's significant others who are waiting behind that door for us, partners, kids, whatever, could you, as the last thing that you do, spend literally 2 minutes in your driveway or in your garage and just allow yourself to fuel yourself with incredibly warm, positive feelings about those beautiful humans that are behind that door? That way, the first experience they have of you is all of you. Now, you might be dead dog tired and can only sustain that for the 30 seconds of receiving them, kids or whatever. But in that moment, they know they got all of you. They've been missing you all day. And then later on, you won't need to feel guilty that you missed that window. Oh, God, I didn't even have 30 seconds to just hear them or receive them or whatever. It makes a big difference. And it's something that you have absolute influence over. And in knowing you can do that, be whatever, the hero mom or the hero partner or the hero friend, it's a good feeling.
That is such good advice. I'm going to carry that with me. You can do anything for 2 minutes.
You sure can.
Right? Be like wicked excited for 2 minutes. Yeah.
But Cara, you said that time, like when you describe that time between cases, you said that was unproductive time. But then hearing you describe it, it might be the most productive thing you do in an OR day is to give yourself permission to have that time. So fascinating.
And that's a total flip. Like that's a total flip of my head because there's always been an element of guilt. Like you're just sitting here in the sun. What are you doing? Like get in there and finish your manuscript, right?
And so, I mean, it's sunny in Cleveland like 3 days a year. Let's be very clear that I'm not like lounging outside at the beach. I just like walk, yeah. But I think that is such an important flip in your brain to give yourself grace and you're right. I'm so much more present when I just have my 3 shots of espresso alone for
That's it.
5 minutes.
And to allow yourself, again, like you've just stepped out of a rocket ship in essence. Like you've been so hyper
Yeah.
focused on something that really matters, and you've achieved an outcome. It's like there's a
Yeah.
coming down from that experience, I think, that is underappreciated. And again, I would love, I mean, if you're an athlete, again, we would, take you in the back and, get you a massage and, get you hydrated and, treat you like a machine. We don't have that potential perhaps in real time where you are, but for 5 minutes to just allow my nervous system to come down from that, and to allow me to, in a relaxed way, process anything that's unresolved or that's going through my head, and then transition into the next thing, not just be shot out of a cannon. You said it yourself. When you are in that position, it just feels like you're always on edge. Yeah, your brain's trying to do two things
Yeah.
at once. Focus on the next thing, but it's like, I'm still coming down from the last thing.
Yes. You nailed it. You nailed it. Jason, you're so good at
Thank
what
you.
you do. Thanks for being alive. Appreciate you.
Well, it's funny, and Jane knows this because she's been a huge supporter. I just had a surgery, not that long ago. Yeah, and
You
you can see
did?
the souvenir I got. I had my thyroid removed.
Oh,
So
whoa.
the idea of, thanks for being alive, that has a sense of realism. The two goals I
I'm
wanted:
so
wake up and produce sound. So
wow.
we're 2 for 2, baby. That's all I needed to.
Yeah.
Wow. That must have given you a whole other perspective on
It really
everything
does.
too,
It really
right? That's
does. There
so
was a moment
scary.
where,
Wow.
I've been part of this peripherally for so long, working with folks like you. But
Yeah.
the moment where it's like, wow, like I'm sitting down on this table that does not look all that comfortable, and it's happening
Nope.
for real. And the things that go through your head as a sort of someone whose background is performance and kind of personal development, thinking, God, I sure hope everybody here is doing well inside. Like I hope you're well rested and you're not worrying about your taxes or whatever. And I had great care, so I'm feeling pretty lucky and grateful.
Wow. Thank you for
Yeah,
sharing that.
pleasure.
That's some pretty intense
So
things.
listen, I know that there was a topic you wanted to get to, and I don't know what you're talking about. It was the
Yes.
burnout moral injury one.
There is. Yeah, I have 2 more questions, Jason. I know we're kind of at time, but I have 2 more
Yeah,
burning
for sure.
questions deep in my soul. So, let's start if you're okay with it. Let's start with the moral injury
Yeah,
question. So, we're feeling this a lot. I keep saying the States, but I
It's
imagine
everywhere.
it's
it's everywhere.
honestly everywhere. Yeah. Yeah. In that I mean, there's this element of burnout maybe where we're maybe working too much and not taking care of ourselves in the right way. But there's also an aspect of this moral injury that I'm seeing in that we can't care for patients the way that we want to care for patients because of system things
Yeah,
outside of our control. An example could be, right, I order an MRI and it doesn't get approved by insurance. I don't have the right imaging to do the right
yeah,
procedure, for instance, or access to care, or how far we're booked out, or, different places that maybe we're operating that we don't have the same resources as other places. But there's this external system element that a lot of
yeah,
us are feeling that's impacting a lot of our bandwidth left in the OR for the high performance
yeah.
that we want to have. How would you approach this with your surgeons? Are you seeing this, and how do you help us through this element of moral injury that's like the
Yeah.
elephant in the room on our
Well, and
day to
maybe even
day?
take it a step further because, again, at the deeper level of the self, what that then becomes or manifests as is it feels like we're doing our damnedest with all of these, inefficiencies and system challenges. But on top of that, it feels like the system doesn't give a shit about us. And that's the part I think
Oh
that
yes,
takes
Jason.
it to that lower level. And once it feels that way, like now you have the regular burnout effects that are always, ever present. But now it takes it to this level where I am now so susceptible to, even at the thought of walking into that place, feeling resentful, feeling angry, feeling
Yes.
upset, and blaming, things outside of myself. And it's a tricky situation because you have every right to feel that way because these things are real and true, and they should, double underline, be better, but they are not. And I'll preface it with an example. It's not exactly a surgical one, but I was working with a physician I don't know what it was at this point, maybe 6 months ago. And this person's story, I think, encapsulates what we're talking about here. And they were, at their wits' end, like just system challenges, near burnout, tired of feeling like they couldn't perform to their high standard, not because they weren't capable, because there was no time, there wasn't enough resources, the things you're alluding to. And you could tell it was really stressing them out. And so I said, you know what? First of all, I have a lot of empathy for that. I mean, things should be better, but they're not. But I said, let's not, perseverate. Let's figure out what can we actually do. And so in this particular case, I said, I always like to ask with an example. I said, is there one thing in particular we could bring to light that sort of highlights this difficulty for you? And they said, oh, sure. Okay, here's one. They have run a clinic that's adjacent to their regular clinical responsibilities, but they've run a clinic for, I forget what it was, 7 years or something like that. And this clinic was every, let's say, Monday morning from 8 a.m. till 12 p.m. And they said, not one effing time in 7 years has that clinic finished before 1 o'clock. So it bleeds an extra hour every single time. And again, this is with someone who's already burned out and has all these time pressures. And so that means that they're going to have to, it's like the toggling between guilt and resentment. I could draw the line and say, no, I'm not doing this, but then I feel a ton of guilt because, my patients are going to get sicker, or I won't see them for 3 months. And so it's just a terrible place to be in. So, but the resentment side is every time I do that. So now there goes my lunch, or I get home later to my family. So it's just this horribly unenviable position to be in. And even as we're talking about it, you could just see her getting fired up, and rightfully so. And I said,
I'm like getting
just
tense
hearing
in my
about it.
shoulder.
Yeah, because it's like so common. And so I said, okay,
I
so let's
know.
first put our lens on directly at the source. I like to say, where is our leverage here? That we can actually employ to try and make our circumstances better. Is our leverage in our circumstances and in the situation? Or if not, and we choose to be here, is my leverage in me adjusting and adapting my perspective and perhaps my schedule to accommodate a system that isn't ideal? So I said, is there anything that we can do at the source to make this clinic end at 12 p.m.? And she said, Jason, I promise you I'm not making excuses. Trust me, I've thought about this 1,000 different ways. The answer is no. It's entirely baked into the system. And she had very legitimate reasons as to why. Like, it was just impossible. I said, okay, then we will not put any attention and focus there. And then we're left with zooming out and going, okay, we can't change it at the source. It's obviously very distracting and frustrating to you. Is the juice worth the squeeze? And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, do you need to do this particular clinic? And it was interesting because in that moment she said, oh, are you kidding me? That's my favorite part of medicine. And, this certain population of people I love to work with. And I said, I'm not asking you to leave it. I'm just trying to figure out, where is our leverage here? We can't change it at the source. And in spite of how frustrating it is and inefficient in certain ways, it's still worth it to be doing it. And she said, absolutely. I said, well, then here's something for your consideration. From this day forward, what would open up if you allowed for yourself that clinic ends at 1 o'clock? And it was not some epiphany thing, but yet she started to smile and realized that there's an element here, though the circumstances are less than ideal and not right, but layered on top of that is, and it's natural to do this, the human resisting the circumstances. It shouldn't be this way, but it is. But it shouldn't, but it is. And that constantly resisting and fighting reality, even though we don't like it, it's not right, it's not fair. I acknowledge all of those things, but that is bringing an additional layer of suffering that is from me to me. There's a beautiful quote, I think it's from Shakespeare. Carrying resentment is like swallowing poison in the hopes that it kills your enemies. Yeah.
God, I think that's
Yeah.
spot
And again, I
on.
want to be perfectly clear.
Wow.
I'm not saying, oh, great, we should just tolerate systems that are, burning us out and causing all this moral injury. No, not tolerate. But if you don't have the ability currently to directly change it, and if you do, by advocating or fighting for it, please move heaven and earth, and put all of your attention and capacity there. But if you don't currently, and it's getting us to a point where we're treading water in terms of our mental emotional state, could I at least try and find a way to help myself by no longer fighting that which I cannot change? And again, it's a power move, if you ask me. And can I
Wow.
backfill, if that's the case, in ensuring that I'm spending more time outside of my work taking care of myself, going for horseback rides, prioritizing my life, taking care of
Mm-hmm.
myself in whatever ways that I can? I like to think and believe that the systems will change. But every single time I say that to people, I'm saying I still like to think that they'll change, meaning they haven't changed. So, when is the big change coming? I don't know. I really don't.
But I think the importance of talking, like someone like you, right? The Academy for Surgical Coaching, we have coaches built in as well for this type of conversations, in that we don't know how heavy that
Oh,
resentment is on our
absolutely.
souls, right? And I think the way you broke that down was beautiful, in that don't become
Right.
submissive, but just accept the things that you absolutely cannot change. And how do we redirect
Yeah.
that energy someplace else and just release that? She must have felt so much lighter when you
She
said that
did,
to
because I
her.
don't think she realized until that moment that, wow. And not only
Right.
that, I think what it highlighted for her is I do have agency here. It's not ideally
Right.
where I would like it to be, to make this not be this way. But it's wrong to think I have none. And so, if you don't
Yes.
take care of yourself, like if my contentment and engagement and satisfaction comes only from the system changing in fundamental ways, you won't have any. And that's a hard
Yeah.
truth, but it is the truth. And that's like just taking the snapshot right here, right now. And I always like to think of it this way too. And again, it's like we talk about the system as though there's, some, I don't know, evil entities, somewhere pulling strings. It's like the system is it's not even a real thing. But the way that hospitals work, I always think to myself, if these fundamental changes didn't happen during COVID, when are they going to happen? Like, never was there a time in history and medicine where, it was so apparent how stressed and stretched people were. And, we're 5 years plus removed from that. And a lot of the same things are still happening. So, again, I have so much empathy and compassion for people who are struggling in that way. But as soon as we leave it to the system to change in the direction that we need, we're going to suffer. And as soon as I start to take a little bit more control of the sense of agency I have, which might just be the perspective I'm bringing to my work and my life, you'd be surprised how much better you can feel.
Brilliant advice. I know we're at time. Be
Of
honest with me. Do you have time for one
course.
more
Yeah,
question? Be
absolutely.
honest. I'm so sorry. I can't let you go yet.
I'm
Jane, are you
totally
okay?
good. Totally good.
And I'm sorry I've asked all the
No.
questions, Jane. Are you
Yeah,
okay if
go
I ask
ahead.
one more question? Okay, thank you guys. So I'm thinking about this space of identity. And I'm thinking about how surgeons, especially, oftentimes being a surgeon is part
Yeah.
of our identity. And I think a lot about this space of, like, is it quote unquote healthy or not healthy to have that as be part of our identity? And I bring this up because I had an executive coach for a while, and we talked a lot about this area, and we created a why statement, right? Like why, like the deeper reason of why I do what I do, and who makes me me, and things that bring me joy, all these different areas. And I would talk about being a surgeon, and she was very much about separating surgeon from being my identity, because then it hinges, if I can't operate, if I can't be a surgeon because of X, Y, or Z, what does that mean for my self-worth? And so how do we separate that? So in your opinion, having how does being a surgeon and keeping that within our identity help or hurt us? And how should we frame our minds
Well,
around that?
and I would say, first thing is, it is a part of your identity. I mean, it really is. Like, you're a surgeon, you're perhaps a mom, you're a friend, you're a community member, you play sports, you go to yoga. Like, these are all parts of our identity. To me, the key thing is not whether it is or isn't, it's to what degree am I keeping that functional. And I believe that, unless we have a broad, multifaceted sense of identity, we're going to be susceptible to collapse. And it's funny, just as like a little visual exercise, One of my mentors, Dr. Cal Botterill, is a legend in sport and exercise psychology. He does this little exercise. He calls it the identity pie. And he would say, okay, just draw a circle. Okay. And now, as though you were divvying up all of the important roles and responsibilities you have in your life based on a percentage of, the significance to you, just sort of divide this up. And it's funny because you'll see sometimes like a surgeon where like we almost need like a, like one of those, what do you call it, a compass or something, like, just the tiniest, mom, husband, friend, soccer player, and then surgeon. And then when you see that and you step back, and now you go, okay, so then tell me, with this as the way that you define yourself, what does a bad day in the OR look like? And what does it mean? It's like, I'm bad. Like, I have failed in life. Like, my whole identity collapses. And I have a friend, brilliant, psychologist and researcher. His name's Dr. Matt Brown, and he studied perspective, and he studied it in the field of high performance sport. And he wanted to know, what are some of the top athletes that consistently perform well? What are some of the things they do that separates them? And this idea of perspective came up. And he said the ones that are at the highest levels, and we could make a case that they're under the most pressure, they're the world champion or the Olympic medalists that are trying to get there. One of the things that allows them to sustain that is they have a broad sense of self. So they are, yes, partly an athlete, but they make sure to be reminded by the fact that they are also whatever else they are, husband, wife, friend, partner, whatever the things are. And not just remind them of that, but to make sure that they are having opportunities and moments to experience those other parts of themselves. And in doing so, it buffers against any one of those roles so effectively taking us over that if I experience some negative consequence there, who I am doesn't collapse under that pressure. And I think that that's very easy in a performance arena such as yours, where the pressures, the demands, the expectations, the costs of poor outcomes are so strong. It's so easy to get swept up on that and lose yourself in that. So to me, it's just about making sure I am staying connected to the other parts of me that are important. And also, I think having relationships that remind you of that. I'll tell you a quick story. A colleague who was working in high performance sport, and she was working simultaneously with two professional teams, basketball team and hockey team. And high pressure athletes, lots of drama, all sorts of stuff going on. And someone asked her one time, so what do you do at the end of a day where you've been knee deep dealing with all these egos and drama, whatever? And she said, I pull out my phone and I call someone who couldn't care less if either of those two teams ever won another game. And it's like, yeah, because those people bring her back to her, not her role, who she is. And so I think it's just staying connected to that idea, making sure, and doing an occasional audit. Step back. Am I really living according to the key priorities of my life? Am I really spending enough time, however you would define that, with the other parts of myself, or am I getting a little bit too lost and all encompassed in all things surgical identity?
Again, incredible perspective. Jane, I want your perspective in this too. Jane wears a hat of like being an incredible high-end soccer player, right? And then crossing over to the physician world, surgeon world, and having that shift a little bit as well. Jane,
yeah, for
will you
sure.
tap into this? Do you feel
So I
comfortable
think,
tapping into this?
like,
I'd love to hear it.
I sort of reflect on like two of the hardest moments in, I guess, my career as I saw it at the time. So, you have a moment in time where, as an athlete, you need to walk away from your true passion, the one thing you love. And I think what I've realized through that experience, and then also those of you who on the call know that, I got hit by a car and I had to walk away from surgery. So it also impacts like your identity. I think what I've realized over this time is a couple of things. One is that it's no different than any other type of grief. And so, having to like walk away from the soccer field it sounds crazy to say when I say it out loud, but it is almost like I have to grieve that as if I've lost. It's different than losing a loved one, but it's almost like losing an appendage. or a part of
Mm.
myself. And I have to grieve that. Like I would grieve other losses. And I think surgery was no different. You have to grieve the loss of something you loved, which is, there's parallels with other walks of life. I think if you suppress, like kind of like we were talking about before, you can keep shoving things down, but you have to talk about it. The thing that was unexpected for me walking away from surgery is that, given that I was a surgeon and there could be a problem, and then I do a procedure, and then after that procedure, that problem is fixed. What I realized from
Yeah.
losing that quick dopamine response of helping, I realized that I was actually an addict for a quick fix of helping.
Wow.
And so, someone didn't hear, I'd operate, they'd wake up in the post anesthetic care unit and they can hear. I mean, that there was nothing like that in terms of reward. And I think what I reflected on is that the loss of that it's almost impossible to replace that with something else. You can improve systems and you can still be who you are. You can still continue to contribute in ways and show up in ways that might help systems as opposed to individuals, or even help individuals, but maybe not that direct link. It's sort of like one removed. I think that perspective gave me permission to grieve something that I knew I couldn't get anywhere else. So I think it was, a grief process, but also a journey where, if you reflected earlier, Cara, about like the why, you can still have that
Mm.
same why as to why you do things. It doesn't have to be a different why. You're just doing it in different ways.
Mm.
Wow, it's so beautiful, and I love the framing of it as a grief because I couldn't agree more. And I might add two things to that. First of all, just as a sort of funny anecdote, I always tease athletes I work with. I go, you realize you've chosen the one vocation with the shortest life expectancy ever to care so passionately about. Like, you can be an accountant for 50 years. You can't be a team counter soccer player for 50 years. That's number one. I also think too,
Yeah.
the flip side, Jane, of when you talked about, being addicted to that dopamine shot of, wow, I have the ability to bring such a remarkable positive experience to the people I care for. The flip side is also then true in terms of being our identity being susceptible, in that if there's a complication or a bad outcome, now do I lose that sense of identity? And I've always described for physicians I've worked with that their main thing is trying to overcome some bad outcome that they just feel horrible about. I've described it that way. Like we're grieving the loss of a sense of
Mhm.
innocence, grieving the loss of a sense of, I know this comes with what we do, but I never thought in a million years it would happen to me. And now it has. That's a grieving process as well. A slow learning to assimilate that experience, forgive myself, draw the lessons, and find a way to step back in with renewed hope and acceptance going forward.
Thank you so much for sharing that, both of you. You guys are so incredible, Jane. I got goosebumps all over me when you were using those words. You said that so eloquently, and I think grieve is the exact right word, and it doesn't sound funny or silly. And I think back to what you said earlier, Jason, about almost feeling gaslit when you don't give it the levity that it needs. Like it deserves the word grief. Like you are losing part
Totally.
of yourself, and I think if we can justify it and frame our minds around that and give the space and the grace to feel that and to justify that, that would go so far for
Yeah.
And
our
be willing to be
colleagues.
vulnerable and talk about this with your coach or a mentor, or the
Yeah.
bottling of things in our culture of, having to be a duck and pretend you're okay. It's okay to
Yeah.
not be okay. And it's also okay to reach out and get that support, because if we don't, we're depriving people of being there for us, which is joyful. We all know what it feels
Yeah.
like to help someone. And so if I suffer in silence, I'm
Yeah.
not giving someone an opportunity to help. And so I think that, that is a
Mm.
beautiful opportunity that I think sometimes we think, oh, I can muster on my own, but it's not always about us. Like,
Mm.
let someone help you, because
Yeah.
you're also filling their bucket, right?
Jane, you're flipping my mind all over the place. I've never thought of it that way, Jane. What the heck? But you're right. Like,
We love getting those calls,
right?
right?
I
We
always
love
recommend.
it. We're like, oh, I can be helpful. Oh my gosh, isn't that great? Because then I have a sense of purpose and I'm
Yes,
being given an opportunity to do something that I love. It's such a
yes.
beautiful thing. Such a beautiful thing.
You're right. It's not necessarily a weight. It's also opening up an entire other avenue of a relationship and modeling the behavior that you want to see in others and reaching out. So modeling that with our trainees also, it makes me think about that. Our residents, our students, our fellows, like modeling that it's okay to be vulnerable and to talk about these things. Thank you guys. Our 20-minute podcast has gone 90 minutes.
And I have a feeling we could continue for like another 8 hours.
Sure. Hey, listen, you ever want to do a part 2? I'd be happy to. This has been
Oh my
Jason,
gosh.
You guys are so I'm like feeling sad that didn't come up is the feel it, fuck it, fix it.
What?
Oh, yes.
And so like I feel like the 3 F's are like a really important thing. So like so feel it, F it, fix it. For me, when you told me that, what is it, like a decade ago now?
Yeah.
It transformed how I approached like things in the OR. Gave
awesome.
me more agency.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I use that with athletes too. And there's a hockey player who just has it written on his hockey stick. And, you know, when he gets frustrated or whatever, he just looks down at that and it provides that, you know, guide to reframe. And we're talking about, you know, Cara, just, you know, again, you hit with something in the OR and you get overwhelmed by some emotion, fear, frustration, whatever. And we kind of joked earlier, I think when one of your, you know, you had a moment where the technical difficulties, you were off the call. And, you know, we don't have the ability to take a half-hour time out in the middle of a surgery. You know, I got to get myself back online right here, right now. And so sometimes it's a quick prompt. And so it was the feel it. Okay, don't pretend. You're not feeling whatever you are. I'm frustrated. I'm anxious. So you can verbalize it out loud or under your breath. And then if there is something I can do in that exact moment, some course correction, something I could be doing better, some lesson I can draw, let's do that. But then the next F is fuck it. Like, and it's not just, again, swearing gratuitously. It's saying that to myself. First of all, that word has power. Like, it captures your attention. And if I say it with some intensity, trust me, that part of me that's distracted, it gets snapped back into focus. You know, it's like, okay, and I'm back until, you know, an opportunity can come across where I can process more effectively. But for right here, right now, I don't have that ability. You know, you're a soccer goalie and you let in a bad goal and in the middle of penalty shots, you better not be carrying that frustration to the next one. You're going to be feeling it, but I got to release from that right here, right now, to be as fully focused for the next one. You know, no different in the OR.
I'm writing that on some part of my body. That's really good. I love that because, again, the weight of not saying fuck it, like that weight, like you don't realize how much weight that is on your mind of just being able to be present and to have the bandwidth to do the thing. So I think that last part is critical. And it may, like you said, you're not just swearing to swear. It actually has an impact on you to maximize your brain to do the thing.
Compartmentalize it.
Shift my attention. Yeah.
That's right. Shift it for later when you have more space to process.
With a coach.
Yeah. With a coach from the Academy for Surgical Coaching or Jason, one of the two. Yeah, one of the two. Jane, thank God we didn't miss that. That was close. Whew.
Oh, there's lots I've learned from Jason over the last decade. He's helped me a lot as a surgeon, and yeah, it's been a very rewarding relationship to be connected to him. He's a very special human.
So are you. Thank you both. I mean, this has been great, and like, I'm not joking. If you ever want to do a part 2 or part 7 or part 12, just let. And listen, not just because I've had a great experience and I love Jane to bits, but it's important what you're doing here. You know, I'll be happy to support that in any capacity that I can. Eventually, my anecdotes run out, but I still got a few in the back. So.
So funny, yeah. But we don't take your time lightly.
Oh,
Like, I
my
don't take your time lightly. I know you were really busy and you gave us a lot of your time today. So thank you,
my
Jason,
pleasure.
truly for
Thank
being
you
here with
both.
us.